Welcome back to Queensland Housing Development, and in this video we're going to be talking about the philosophy of site suitability and background due diligence for housing development throughout Queensland. Basically using realestate.com.au to find land and talk through the process of evaluating a site for background due diligence purposes. I personally have public and private industry experience in development assessment. However, please treat these videos as general interest only because all projects are uniquely different and require specialized focus and attention to specific project details. These videos are my personal housing site suitability diaries, intended as reminders for myself, but if you get some worth out of them, please consider subscribing, liking, or leaving a comment about questions, queries on housing development in a particular local government area, and I shall endeavour to create a video on that topic. So let's have a look. So we're on realestate.com.au. We're looking for a parcel of land of interest. This particular site may be in the Brisbane City Council area. So we're just looking for something that may be of interest. And we come across this one at 19 Dine Street, Red Hill, around $800,000. It's about 405 square meters, and we're sort of wanting to evaluate it for site constraints. So we click on it, have a bit of a look, and we ask ourselves, is this parcel of land worth buying to build a single detached dwelling house on? So as we can see, it is quite narrow. We don't really know what planning constraints are on the site. And as we're having a look, as you can see in the top back left-hand corner, it does seem to be at the base of a hill, which would indicate water runs downhill. And then we have this kind of levee that is coming through right through the site. So this would indicate at some point when this was going through the Greenfield Development or Planner Survey, that there is a water issue here maybe. And they've built this purpose-built levee to take this water that runs downhill at the lowest point of gravity and then guide it towards this area so it can drain correctly. So these are some early indicators that what exists on this site and how much is it going to obstruct building a house. So let's do some preliminary background information. First and foremost, we copy and paste the address and we go over to a site by Queensland Government called Queensland Globe. You can just Google this. So we have 77 local government areas, as you can see, in the state of Queensland. To rely on all 77 LGAs wherever you are looking at buying land or building a house, they all update their geographic information systems at different rates. But once everything transitions through to the Queensland Titles Registry, it all ends up on this website. So this is more reliable than trying to go to individual LGAs all the time. So we just put the address in, top left-hand corner. As you can see, 19 Dine Street has come through. And we can see it's in the Brisbane City Council area. There it is right there. And what we really want to do and what we're going for here, you would record all this information on a Microsoft Word spreadsheet. So you want to collect all this preliminary information that we're going through today. So because you're going to use it later on to read through every policy that may be triggered on this site. And that's what we call site background due diligence. So you know the constraints of a site before you buy it so it can accommodate a house. So we go to the top right-hand corner, press the information button, and we select the site and just the land parcel on the top left-hand corner. And for today, we're just going after that lot plan number. So copy and paste that lot plan number. And now we're on the Brisbane City Council interactive mapping website where we're going to be able to see the policies we need to comply with, as well as the visual representation of what affects that site. So we go ahead, top left-hand corner, we just select lot on plan number, and then we go ahead and copy and paste, or paste that lot plan number that we just copied from Queensland Globe. Press OK. As you can see, it's highlighted in red. And now on the left-hand side of this Brisbane City Council Planning Scheme interactive mapping website, it tells us the zone. That zone and that CR1 character, that is the residential zone it is on. So if we click that on and we zoom out a little bit, we can actually see all the different zones that surround it. And we can see that it's fairly common in this particular area to be a CR1 character. So that's the zone that we're going to have to write down in your Microsoft Word spreadsheet. And we'll just click that off and we'll go through it. It's in the neighborhood plans. This is going to have a separate policy. You're going to have to read through that policy and ensure that your residential housing design fits those requirements. And then we go down to the overlays. And as we can see, the airport environs overlay. And it has 3 here. So it has the OLS, Horizontal Limitation Service, procedures for air navigation service, and this BBS zone, distance from airport. So what does that mean? We can pretty much turn that on. And now we can sort of zoom out. And that sort of puts us, I'll turn all 3 on. There is the airport, and this is the zone that we're actually going to be falling within. So that will have different policies, but it may have further restrictions, such as reflective materials, wildlife corridors, and a whole range of other restrictions because of the proximity to the airport and depending on which direction the planes are actually coming in. And if you're just building a single detached dwelling house, single story, these are not going to be major issues. It really depends on the proximity and the site. That's why it's always important to do your site background due diligence, because you don't actually know what applies to a site until you start looking everything on a case-by-case basis. So if we turn that off and we zoom back into the site and we ask ourselves, on the left-hand side, these are all the overlays that do trigger. So you would write each heading down and what that trigger is, such as potential and actual acid sulfate soils. You just want to write that down because you want to actually address any of those concerns. Streetscape hierarchy, traditional building character overlay. So that is going to have different restrictions on what sort of building materials you may be able to have or may not be able to have, and that's your responsibility. Why development applications really blow out is because all this precursor information is not addressed into the original residential design, which causes back and forth information requests and back and forth issues. If we incorporate all this before you even engage a residential designer and make these sort of subtle changes yourself and know what you need to comply with, you can avoid lengthy development applications altogether. So let's turn that off and we'll go over to the right-hand side and we're going to turn the zones off and we're going to leave the overlays on and we're just going to have a look at the flood overlay. So you would turn all these on and off just to see how much of a proportional rate overlays that site, so you understand where your building envelope may be, where you can and cannot build, where the restrictions are going to be. And like I said before, every site is going to be different. So if we go ahead and turn the flood overlay, we can see that the Brisbane River flood planning area does not seem to trigger this site, and that's a good thing. Then we have the Creek Water flood planning area. It seems to be right in the middle of it. So this would have its own policy, a flood inundation policy, and it would be your responsibility to go through that. That may have defined flood level requirements. This might be provided by the local government, or in some cases, you may need to establish that through hydro modelling, and that may have further requirements such as 300 to 500 millimeters above the Q100 where your habitable rooms are allowed to be. So these are things to keep in mind. I think to myself, because I have interests, in property development, and I want to avoid these sites altogether. So I would ask myself, why would I want to put a house in the middle of this when I could be looking at other sites somewhere else? So let's turn that one off, and we'll turn the overland flow flood planning area. And as you can see, this may have further restrictions, and we're going to go through where you're going to find those policies in a minute. But as you can see, it is right in the middle. Me personally, I would see that as negotiation to reduce that $800,000 bill. Why are you going to pay $800,000 for something that's going to could potentially cost you a bit of money to resolve or mitigate the issues of being in a floodplain, when you can avoid it altogether and pick another site somewhere else that is not significantly impacted like this? So something to keep in mind, on the left-hand side are your policies that trigger on the site. On the right-hand side are the visual representations, the geographic information system, visual representation, so you understand visually how much of the site is being affected. And now I'll show you where we get these policies from. So this is the Brisbane City Planning Scheme, and one of the first things that I personally do is go straight to the table of assessment that we'll do right here, and we ask ourselves a material change of use under categories of development, and we're going to look at the residential zones, and we ask ourselves, what zone was it in? We say it was in the character residential zone. So here is the tables of assessment, and as you can see, a dwelling house is accepted development if it's identified in Schedule 6 of the regulations. Please read that in your own time. And these notes, you're going to have to go through the overlays and make sure that anything that is triggered does not get elevated to the next level of assessment from accepted development to code assessable development, and that you incorporate all those restrictions that we're talking about before in those overlay policies and development codes, whatever this says, which is the dwelling house code, into your design and before you even start going down the route of wanting to build it. But to get to the point of the video, we're going to reduce that and we're going to have a look at the zones. So the zone, you would need to incorporate the residential zones, and there is the character zone code. You would make sure that your building design complies with every single one of these. I never said it was quick and easy reading, but if you go through one by one, you can incorporate many of these aspects into your design before you engage a building certifier, picking out the pertinent information that you need. So as we keep going down, all those overlays that we're talking about, overlay codes, you would start picking them out. So as we're looking at before with the flood overlay code, here it is. And this is where it applies to and everything that you're going to have to demonstrate compliance if you need a development application or you're able to incorporate some of these problematic areas into your residential design. So something council don't tell you is if it's accepted development, you have to comply with all the accepted outcomes for accepted development. If you need a development application, which can be easier, believe it or not, is that council prefer you to comply with acceptable outcomes, but you don't have to if you have a code assessable development application. If you can demonstrate compliance with all the performance outcomes, which are in most instances are qualitative claims, then you will get an approval pretty quick. If you don't comply with these performance outcomes, as a very minimum, and this is the minimum standard, you have to demonstrate that your development or your proposed development actually meets all the purposes of the code. Usually this is written in a more broader sense. So as long as you can tick off a lot of these purpose codes, and there's only 2, even though they have a lot of subs, then you're going to be able to develop that parcel of land that we're talking about. But the onus is on the person who wants to develop the land to make sure that they are compliant with all of these policies. So this was just an example. If you take your Microsoft Word spreadsheet and you've listed all the overlay codes that affect the site, the zone code, the development code, etc., and then go through each policy in this planning scheme one by one, tick them off of how they affect that site, you'll find some are much easier than others, and it really depends on the planning constraints that are on your site. In my opinion, it is much easier just to avoid complicated sites if you're flexible in location and you know the house that you want to build and you are happy to make those sacrifices and shape the house to the site constraints. You can avoid development applications altogether if you go down that route. All right. Thanks for listening. Much appreciated. I'll see you on the next one.